tracing the source of the Ebola outbreak while adapting to living under the threat of the virus. A low-tech ambulance assists pregnant women in Nairobi. And science made fun. Interstellar hijinks aboard the International Space Station. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello, I'm Lenore Moudou. Vincent McCurry is on assignment. This is Africa 54. Tonight, we begin with the Ebola crisis. Because of the size and seriousness of the Ebola outbreak, VOA and BBC are collaborating in order to give audiences in Africa and around the world access to the best information and content available. Blood samples gathered from Ebola patients in Guinea are being examined this week by specialists in the hope of tracing the origin of the current outbreak. In Conakry, the capital of Guinea, people are trying to adapt to living under the threat of Ebola, as Ibrahim Dihan reports.
Ebola continues to take the lives of Guineans across the country. With a population of about 2 million residents, most of the economic activities in this country are concentrated in Conakry.
We are in the capital of Guinea, Conakry. Guinea is one of the worst affected by the outbreak of Ebola. But here, as you can see, life goes on as normal. People take the public transport as usual.
But just like with the rest of the country, the Ebola crisis is impacting negatively on small businesses, including street traders. Regularly wash your hands is the main message here.
When I finish work, I'm going to wash my hand, and when I finish, I come back to work. Because I don't know who have the Ebola, who don't have Ebola.
Well, the regular washing of hands has created business opportunities for some. These buckets with a tap, which are placed in front of shops or offices, are becoming popular. But not everyone here is willing to abandon old cultural practices.
Malheureusement, l'urgence sanitaire a voulu qu'en réalité on s'engage dans une campagne.
The health emergency dictated that the sensitization campaign should start with a behavioral study. Society in Guinea is built around a tradition of contact. We hold hands, touch each other, we eat together, we live together as a family, we are closely linked, whereas Ebola is a disease which breaks social links.
The government here has launched a new public health campaign involving religious and traditional leaders, which it hopes will help reduce Ebola infections. Ibrahima Diane, BBC News, Conakry.
And that was BBC's Ibrahim Diane reporting. Now, Boko Haram continues to strike in Nigeria. The group was blamed for an attack in Potiskum, northeastern Nigeria, 1 week ago, when a suicide bomber attacked a religious procession, killing more than 2,000 people. The group is also suspected suicide bombing attacked secondary school Monday in Yobe State, killing more than 48 people, mostly students. Joining us in the studio for more perspective on the subject is Emmanuel Ogebe, international human rights lawyer and expert in bilateral U.S.-Nigerian relations. Mr. Ogebe, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much, Lenore.
Thank you for joining us. Listen, first of all, let me have your reaction to yesterday's attack in Potiskum Secondary School.
Well, that is the first bombing of a secondary school by Boko Haram. Their bombings have generally been reserved for churches, the United Nations, MPF. The last time they attacked in Yobe in February, they actually killed about the same number of students by slitting their throats. So to actually put a bomb in a school and blow them up is horrendous. It's a new low for Boko Haram.
So what does it tell us? Are they getting bolder? What do they want? What is the message here?
Well, we must be very candid with ourselves. Boko Haram is much worse today than it was ever in its history. As we're speaking, Boko Haram is in control of about 30 cities in northern Nigeria. In the past 10 days, it's captured the largest city, the second largest city in Adamawa State, which is Mubi, and which is the home of the Chief of Defense Staff. If you have a terrorist group that has captured the hometown of the Chief of Defense Staff, that tells you that things are really bad.
So the militant group seems to be successful in its quest to kill and kidnap. Why do you think so?
Well, I have to say that sadly, we're not getting as much help as we would expect.
Despite the international
Despite
outcry?
all of that, the Nigerian ambassador yesterday lashed out at the U.S., saying, hey, listen, you're not helping us as much as you should. But the blame also goes to some of the African countries. South Africa, for example, has confiscated funds that the Nigerian military sent to South Africa to acquire weapons. This is the same South Africa that Nigeria provided weapons to during the anti-apartheid war. So we need to see more cooperation. And then we mustn't forget what happened with Chad. The president of Chad misled Nigeria to negotiate with a phantom Boko Haram, and that allowed Boko Haram to make some of the successes that they did. So we all need to come together and face this terror group.
Very serious allegations there. So basically what you're saying is African countries are not doing enough. There's not enough solidarity.
There's not enough solidarity. And we must remember what is happening in Nigeria now is exactly what happened in northern Mali. A bunch of terrorists overthrew the town of Gao, which was the largest city in northern Mali. And it was so terrifying that France sent in troops.
Indeed.
Other African countries sent in troops, including Chad, Nigeria, and a few others, and rolled them back. When you have a city like Mubi fall, that's a time when you need to have, if the French could come in, they should come in. But we know they won't because they don't have the historical colonial ties with Nigeria. But this is a time when African forces, AU, ECOWAS, we should all come in and isolate these guys.
So we're going to get ready to wrap up, but before you go, I really want you to talk about the girls. I mean, where are they? Where do we go from here? They're married off, some of them died. What is the situation?
Yes, I mean, and this is really very tragic. Boko Haram has announced that they've been married off, and that is code word for mass rape. They try to cloak it in, religious terms, but no, this is essentially what they've done. And from the information we have, some of them have died in the process. We don't even know if one of them was not used as a suicide bomber on an attack in a school some time ago. So that is what is happening with the girls. A few of them who have escaped, we've been fortunate to be able to assist them with scholarships to be able to go back into school. And that's what everyone should be able to do. Everyone can play a role to redeem the situation.
Solidarity indeed is important.
Yes, it is.
Mr. Ogebe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Lenore.
And that was Emmanuel Ogebe. He is an international human rights lawyer and expert on bilateral U.S.-Nigerian relations. U.S. President Barack Obama has held several brief meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines at the Asia-Pacific Economic Summit in Beijing Tuesday. The world leaders discussed a few of the key global issues on which their governments disagree. VOA White House correspondent Ruth Ramirez has more. Mr. Obama's arrival in China.
The arrival of the U.S. president in Beijing Monday was a time for both sides to put on a good face. Chinese honor guard and red carpet welcomed Mr. Obama. The president's first purpose on this visit is to attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. He met with leaders of Indonesia and Australia before addressing Asia-Pacific business leaders. Dispelling China's suspicions was at the top of his agenda.
The United States welcomes the rise of a prosperous, peaceful, and stable China. I want to repeat that.
Mr. Obama said integrating China into the world economy is good for America and the world, and he said America wants China to do well. As a goodwill gesture and in the hope of deepening ties, the U.S. leader announced an agreement to extend the duration of visas for Chinese students, business people, and tourists.
Under the new arrangement, student and exchange visas will be extended to 5 years. Business and tourist visas will be extended to 10 years.
But still to be overcome are major differences on issues like human rights and whether Beijing is going to honor Hong Kong's democratic process, a concern that has triggered violent demonstrations. Trade is another issue that is not likely to be resolved soon. The United States and China are pursuing rival deals in the region. Mr. Obama met Monday with leaders of Trans-Pacific Partnership countries to try to surmount obstacles and reach an agreement. At the end of the day, Chinese leaders put on a fireworks show. Despite their differences, U.S. leaders want to think the future of their relations is bright. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, Beijing.
And while U.S. President Barack Obama is in Asia for talks with world leaders, a Republican-controlled Congress might put an unexpected twist to the president's policy towards Asia. VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns tells us why.
The president's trip to Asia is his first since Republicans won control of Congress, a political setback that the Atlantic Council's Robert Manning says could undermine Mr. Obama's influence in Asia over his last 2 years.
We've seen China and the East and South China Seas become much more assertive over the last couple of years, and if they see Obama as a lame duck, they may decide that they can ignore U.S. protests to the contrary.
China this year has taken a more aggressive approach to the South China Sea, where Vietnam says China's Coast Guard rammed one of its patrols. U.S. efforts at a code of conduct for these disputed waters have failed to attract Chinese support, says American Enterprise Institute analyst Michael Oslin.
It hasn't worked. It's never going to work. And I think that our diplomatic energies should probably be spent more on working with our allies than trying to maintain the fiction that we and China have a working relationship.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says Washington's not giving up on a code of conduct or on improving cooperation with Beijing.
The U.S.-China relationship is the most consequential in the world today, period. And it will do much to determine the shape of the 21st century. That means that we have to get it right.
President Obama came to office pushing an Asia pivot of military, commercial, and diplomatic resources to the region. But that promise was never delivered on, says Cato Institute analyst Justin Logan, and is unlikely to improve now that the president's facing opposition majorities in Congress.
I suspect that he would like to have a more strategic focus and would like to follow through on the so-called pivot. But even he, again, is subject to the pressures of the media, the news cycle, legislative pressures.
At a time when Beijing is expanding its influence in the Asia-Pacific, Logan says Washington's consumed with fighting terrorists in Iraq and Syria.
And I think that is where the pivot has really fallen apart because, people are working 16-hour days trying to figure out who we want to win the Syrian civil war instead of thinking carefully about South and East China Sea issues.
If the president is to revive his Asia pivot, Oslin says his administration must take a more muscular approach.
And if they don't want their legacy to be the high-minded goal of a pivot that never went much beyond rhetoric and certainly didn't change the balance of power in a positive way that they wanted, plus wound up with much worse U.S.-China relations by 2017 when they leave office, then it's time to change your tactics.
Oslin says Mr. Obama can show both Asian allies and Republicans in Congress the seriousness of his pivot by backing United Nations mediation under international law in disputed waters, rather than a non-binding code of conduct. Scott Stearns, VOA News at the State Department.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, wheelbarrow ambulance assists pregnant women in Nairobi. Stay with us. Welcome back to Africa 54. The wheelbarrow ambulance in Nairobi's largest informal settlement, Kibera, has been modified to assist pregnant women to get to medical facilities faster, reducing maternal mortality rates in the process. Lenny Ruvaga has more from Kibera, Kenya.
This is Laini Saba in Kibera, Kenya's largest informal settlement with more than 500,000 residents. Most of the shanties that dot the area lack basic amenities such as electricity, toilets and water. 7 years ago, in a bid to bring quality medical care to locals, African Medical Research Foundation, or AMREF Kenya, began the Kibera Community Health Center, serving more than 50,000 residents. One of AMREF's flagship programs is the Stand Up for African Mothers campaign to reduce maternal mortality. Angeline Agina is one of the beneficiaries of this campaign. The 28-year-old mother of one religiously keeps her prenatal checkups at 23 weeks pregnant, thanks to subsidies from AMREF that her $100 a month income could stretch to cover. Another hallmark of the AMREF program is the wheelbarrow ambulance for women in labor who live in remote parts of Kibera. Agina says she is not worried now when the time comes to give birth.
The wheelbarrow ambulance is actually good because cars and conventional ambulances cannot access my house. Once I go into labor, the wheelbarrow can be here in minutes to take me to the clinic.
AMREF has 4 modified wheelbarrow ambulances which cost $100 each, yet serve nearly 10,000 expectant mothers here. Meet Wycliffe Ogenya, working here from Kenya's Ministry of Health. Today, he's paying Agina a special visit to check on her pregnancy and conduct a simulation run with the wheelbarrow ambulance. The ambulance is fitted with a battery-powered siren and bedding to make the ride more comfortable along Kibera's harsh and bumpy terrain. Ogenya says part of his role is to help Kenya meet the United Nations Millennium Development Goals in the healthcare arena.
I am in charge of 2,500 households. My role entails promoting health at the household level, and one of the aspects we are looking at is the MDG number 5, which talks of improving maternal health. Now in this case we are looking at mothers who are expectant, and we are ensuring that they have institutional deliveries.
In 2010, about 162,000 women died in sub-Saharan Africa during pregnancy and childbirth for lack of simple, affordable medical care. At the current rate of progress in sub-Saharan Africa, the MDG to reduce child mortality will not be met until 2165, and the goal to improve maternal health is desperately off track. For Agina, though, and other expectant mothers, the wheelbarrow brigade and the healthcare that comes along with it has greatly improved their chances of a healthy delivery. Lenny Ruvaga for VOA News, Nairobi.
Today is Veterans Day in the United States. It's the federal holiday that honors people who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. Our next story follows 2 war veterans and a photojournalist on a 640-kilometer soul-searching trek in the film The Last Patrol. VOA's Pelenopoulou spoke with filmmaker Sebastian Junger.
Until you hear the snap of a bullet go by your head, there's nothing else like it.
Regardless of the danger, many war veterans miss war, says filmmaker Sebastian Junger. He knows because he was there in the Korengal Valley, Afghanistan, filming in 2008.
You're just there at an outpost getting shot at with those guys.
That closeness and camaraderie, he says, are hard to find back home.
You know, I feel like this society invented loneliness.
It's comforting to live in a group, and when that's gone, it can be a very difficult adjustment to make.
Dave is one of the war veterans who fought in Korengal. He's looking for purpose in civilian life.
I'm ready for a night.
The same is true of Sergeant Brendan O'Byrne. Younger describes him as an incredibly effective soldier and team leader.
And then he comes home to the United States and he's a mess. Drank way too much, very self-destructive. But when we started doing The Last Patrol, all of a sudden I would see the old Brendan that I remembered from Afghanistan.
Younger says Americans can help war veterans readjust to daily life only if they understand what soldiers miss about combat. Otherwise, he says, society is not going to provide a place for them back home where they can feel comfortable. But first, he and his team had to define what is home. That was another reason, he says, they set out on their 640-kilometer journey. The last patrol is like a travelogue, showing the group camping, cooking in the woods, bathing in rivers, and braving the elements as they walk along the railroad tracks.
The thing about railroad line is it goes straight through farms, woods, ghettos, suburbs, inner city, industry. It goes straight through the middle of everything. And on the way, we were asking Americans that we met how America was doing. How do you think America's doing? What's the thing you like best about this country? What do you like worst about it? And we just did this 400-mile assessment of where my country's at right now and where we're at.
We're trying to figure out what the best thing about America is. What do you think? What do you think's the best thing about this country?
That you're free, freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech, man. Freedom of religion.
Yeah, it's free country.
Best thing about America?
Yeah.
I gotta Google it first.
The Last Patrol portrays how some war veterans in America feel lost, trying to find their way at a time of peace.
Do you miss combat at all?
Yeah, I do.
Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
The realities of war often leave soldiers suffering for years. A new project is trying to change that. VOA's Bernard Schussman from New York tells us how this works.
Three buddies deciding what to do with their lives after high school. The decision: join the U.S. Army. But combat in Afghanistan took its toll on these soldiers, who are now suffering psychological trauma. This film is produced and acted by soldiers. The film production process is a key part of a PTSD treatment program called I Was There. It was created by Ben Patton, grandson of one of America's best-known World War II generals, George Patton. A trained psychologist and movie producer, Patton travels to Army bases where he spends 4 days at each location helping soldiers tell their stories and express their feelings on film.
They will go from often being unengaging and unwilling to engage and not really in a situation or a state of mind where they want to share anything with anyone, even their own family or their battle buddies. And by the end of the sessions, by the end of the final session, they have produced, in collaboration with 2 or 3 other fellow veterans, short films, really topically about anything they want, but 95% of the time it relates in some way to the service-related stress that they've experienced.
Some 300 films have been produced by the soldiers participating in the program. Patton says surveys done in the weeks after the workshops show a 20% drop in typical post-traumatic stress symptoms. Dr. Rivka Tuval-Shiach is a Patton program advisor.
Just being listened to without being judged, without being offered quick solutions is really very effective in contributing to a higher self-esteem, to a higher self-confidence.
Soldiers describe their experience with the program.
Day one, you're coming in, someone like me comes in, not feeling at ease at all, and not sure how things are going to turn out. To day 4, I'm coming in here with a smile on my face, feeling like I have a purpose in life today.
Army Sergeant First Class Gary Sands wrote and acted in his film, Crossroads Rise.
I just opened myself to the experience and what they were trying to say and took it in and thought, hey, well, let's see where this goes. Maybe we can do something with this. And it was impressive.
Participants like Gary and his wife, Claudia, are encouraged to share their film and experiences with family and friends. Patton says this exercise in collaboration and expression is helping vets and their families recover from the problems created by PTSD. Bernard Schussman, VOA News, New York.
It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. A new camera takes selfies to a whole new level. We'll be right back.
The number of cases are reducing.
dont nos fragiles nations devraient se passer afin d'aller définitivement.
Depuis l'Union africaine est là pour les accompagner.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here is what's trending. How far would you go to get the perfect selfie? Meet the Nixie. It's a wristband that converts to a camera-equipped drone. By pressing a button, users unlock the band before flicking the quadcopter into the air. The drone tracks the user's movements using motion sensors, and after taking photographs or video, flies back to its owner like a boomerang. But don't rush out to the store to find one just yet. The Nixie is still in development. Speaking of moving cameras, time to go interstellar. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station conducted an experiment by submerging a sealed GoPro camera into a floating ball of water the size of a softball. They then recorded the activity with a 3D camera. This amazing video has gone viral. It's been viewed over 1.6 million times on YouTube. And finally, the blockbuster action franchise, The Hunger Games, is hitting the stage. The show will open in London in the summer of 2016 in a new purpose-built theater next to Wembley Stadium. The studio behind The Hunger Games says the show will be produced by Tony Award winner Robin De La Vita and other theater notables. The latest installment in the series, The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1, will be released worldwide on November 21st. And that's what's trending today. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 300 and 600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching and good night from Washington.
We're able to touch on things that are important to people on an everyday basis.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54.
In a lively half hour, news, sports, health, lifestyle information, comments from our viewers. Africa 54, the best for Africa, about Africa. Join us only on VOA.